Okay, let's unpack this. There are these, well, really deep questions that seem to have followed humanity forever, haven't they? Like, what actually happens when we die?
Does anything continue?
Exactly. And for those left behind, dealing with loss, maybe the biggest one is, can we somehow still connect? Can we communicate with them?
They're profound questions, aren't they? They touch on grief, reality, everything. And interestingly, it's not just faith or philosophy asking them. For a long time now, people have tried to find answers through, well, observation, investigation,
Hmm.
even using technology.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got this collection of sources, research papers, studies, personal testimonies, all looking at these different ways people supposedly communicate with the deceased.
Mhm.
Our plan is to really get into these sources. We want to look at the concepts like after-death communication, induced after-death communication, instrumental transcommunication, unpack the history, the research behind them, the evidence presented, and the questions they raise.
And it's important to say up front, this stuff can be really sensitive, really personal.
Definitely.
Our goal here is just to present and analyze what's in these specific sources. We're looking at what these accounts and studies claim, what they suggest, as impartially as possible.
Right. So let's start with something maybe quite a few people have encountered, possibly even themselves, but didn't have a name for it. After-death communication, ADC.
Right. So ADC, as the sources define it, refers to these spontaneous experiences, manifestations from the deceased that happen directly to grieving relatives or friends.
Spontaneous and direct, that's key. No intermediary.
Exactly. No medium involved in something that just happens unexpectedly, out of the blue, for the person experiencing it.
And the sources say it's not just about seeing someone, is it? It can take many forms.
That's right. These accounts describe a whole range of things. Visual sightings, yes, but also smelling things like a specific perfume or pipe smoke strongly associated with the person.
Oh.
Or hearing a voice, feeling a touch, like a hand on the shoulder, or even just this really strong, undeniable sense that the person is right there in the room.
Wow. And what's the feeling usually associated with these?
Often, according to the reports, there's a powerful emotional component. Frequently feelings of peace, reassurance, love, a sense that the person who died is okay.
It's kind of amazing how long people have been seriously looking into this stuff. The sources point out it's not a new thing.
Not at all. Way before near-death experience studies became well known, you had these pioneers in what they called psychic research back then. People like Frederick Myers, Frank Podmore, Edmund Gurney.
With the Society for Psychical Research.
Exactly. Back in the 1880s, they were systematically gathering thousands of personal accounts of these kinds of spontaneous experiences, trying to apply some empirical rigor to it.
Thousands, really. And are these experiences actually common? What did the studies cited say?
That's one of the striking points in the sources. Some studies done in Western countries suggest it's, well, surprisingly prevalent. We're talking maybe around 30% of people polled saying they've had some kind of contact experience with someone who died.
30%. That's a lot more than you might think.
It really is. It suggests a significant part of the human experience for many.
So for the people who have these ADCs, what's the impact? How does it affect their grieving process, according to the sources?
The sources consistently highlight a really profound subjective impact. People report that it makes their grief much more bearable. It brings this deep sense of solace,
Mm-hmm.
and often it can actually shift their core beliefs about life and death. It changes their whole perspective. Ultimately, the claim is that these experiences really help people cope with loss and move through their mourning in a different way.
Okay, but the obvious counter-argument, especially when someone is grieving, is that these are just wishful thinking, hallucinations, illusions brought on by grief.
That's definitely the main skeptical viewpoint presented, often termed pseudo-skeptical, in these particular sources. But the sources also offer counterpoints. They argue that not all ADCs seem purely subjective or internal.
How so?
They cite cases where the reported experience is linked to something, well, objective, observable things, like objects moving or even breaking at the time of the experience,
Okay.
or sounds that are apparently recordable, apparitions that supposedly cast shadows or show up in mirrors, or, interestingly, situations where more than one person perceives the same thing at the same time.
Multiple witnesses. That's interesting.
And then there's the really compelling aspect highlighted in the sources, the communication of new information.
Information the living person didn't know beforehand.
Exactly. Information that they couldn't have known through normal means, but which is later verified as being true. That's harder to explain away as just hallucination.
Is there a specific example of that in the sources?
Yes, there's a classic case they detail. James Chaffin's will. He was a farmer, died back in 1921. Years earlier, in 1905, he'd made a will leaving everything to one son, disinheriting the others.
Right.
But then, in 1919, apparently without telling anyone, he wrote a new will, a fairer one, and hid it inside an old family Bible. When he died, the old 1905 will was the one found and probated.
So the new hidden will was unknown.
Completely unknown, it seems. But then, get this. 16 years after Chaffin died, so around 1937, one of the disinherited sons reported seeing his father's apparition.
16 years later. Wow.
Yeah, the apparition supposedly told him about the new will and said it was hidden in the pocket of his old overcoat. The son went, found the coat, and inside a pocket that had been sewn shut, he found a note.
A note from his father.
In his father's handwriting, apparently. And the note gave a specific reference, like a chapter and verse, pointing to where the actual will was hidden in that Bible.
And they found the will there.
They did. The sources mention the lawyer involved later, Arthur Berger, found the story incredible but couldn't deny the outcome. The second will was found exactly as indicated, and it was legally validated.
That's quite something. The key point being the specific, verifiable info.
Precisely. That's what the sources emphasize: information the son couldn't have known, supposedly delivered via the apparition. It challenges the simple hallucination explanation.
The sources also mention more recent examples from the After-Death Communication Research Foundation, ADCRF. What are those like?
They show similar patterns. There's Babette B's account. She wakes up suddenly, sees her brother, who had passed away, sitting right there on her bed. She described him really clearly: jeans, leather jacket, his hair shining, eyes sparkling.
And how did she feel? Scared?
Interestingly, no. She said it felt totally normal at the time, not frightening. And she recalled his message clearly, that he wasn't really gone, he was okay, happy, and she needed to stop crying so much. It's presented as a typical visual and auditory ADC.
Okay, and there was another one, Marie M., highlighting different senses.
Exactly. Marie M. woke up feeling someone right beside her, squeezing her very tightly. She said she instantly knew it was him because of his distinctive way of holding her.
A tactile sensation.
Yes, very strong. She felt his hand, squeezed it back, felt his breath on her, even smelled his characteristic scent. She had absolute certainty he was physically there.
And the effect on her.
Profoundly positive. She reported feeling much better afterwards, feeling his presence constantly, day and night. It changed her belief. She felt he wasn't dead, just alive in another form. These accounts showcase that comforting, often belief-altering impact the sources describe.
Okay, so that's ADC, spontaneous communication. But then the sources talk about something related, but different. Something induced.
Yes, that brings us to induced after-death communication, or IADC. This is described as a specific therapeutic technique developed by an American psychologist, Dr. Alan Botkin.
So this isn't spontaneous, it's intentional.
Right.
Facilitated.
Correct. The claim is that this technique allows people to intentionally seek contact with deceased loved ones within a therapeutic context.
How did Dr. Botkin come up with this? What's his background?
Well, the sources trace it back to his work in the 70s and 80s with war veterans suffering from severe PTSD. He was using confrontational therapy initially, but he found it wasn't very efficient, often quite slow.
Okay.
Then, around 1990, he started using EMDR eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. He noticed it often worked much faster for trauma, sometimes resolving deep issues in just one session.
Can you give us a quick refresher on how standard EMDR works based on the sources?
Sure. In standard EMDR, the patient focuses on a negative thought or a traumatic memory image. While holding that focus, they follow the therapist's fingers moving back and forth or listen to alternating sounds, things like that.
A lateral stimulation.
Exactly. After sets of these eye movements, they might focus on a positive belief they want to install. The theory is these rapid eye movements help the brain process the traumatic memory, reducing the emotional distress tied to it.
So how did that trauma therapy lead to, well, communicating with the dead?
It happened unexpectedly, according to the sources. Botkin was working with a Vietnam vet named Sam, who was deeply grieving the death of a young Vietnamese orphan, Le, whom he'd planned to adopt, but who was tragically killed in a bombing.
Oh, terrible.
During an EMDR session focused on this grief, Sam had this extraordinary experience. He reported seeing Le, but not as a child. He saw her as a grown woman. He felt her arms around him, heard her thank him.
Wow. And Sam believed it was real contact.
Absolutely. He was apparently overwhelmed, felt it was completely genuine, and it brought him immense relief and joy, resolving years of intense pain right then and there.
How did Botkin react? Must have been surprising.
He was initially skeptical, Naturally, he thought maybe it was a very vivid, helpful visualization, a product of the therapy, but he couldn't ignore the profound healing effect it had on Sam.
Hmm.
And then, crucially, he started noticing similar spontaneous experiences happening with other grieving patients during EMDR sessions. That's what prompted him to investigate it systematically and develop IADC specifically for grief.
So how did he adapt the EMDR process for IADC? What's the method?
As described in the sources, the IADC method starts with the therapist guiding the patient to focus intensely on their feelings of grief about the person they've lost. Then, after some sets of the eye movements or other bilateral stimulation, when the patient reports the intensity of the grief starting to decrease,
Yes.
the therapist instructs them to just keep their eyes closed. The idea is to enter a state of quiet receptivity, almost like opening a channel, making them potentially more receptive to receiving some kind of information or sense of connection from the deceased.
Can you share that first specific IADC example the sources give, the one with Gary?
Yes, Gary's daughter, Julie, had died at 11. She'd had severe health challenges since birth, both physical and mental limitations. She actually died in Gary's arms.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Very. And Gary wasn't someone who believed in an afterlife, but he was willing to try Botkin's method for his grief. During the session, he reported this vivid vision.
What did she see?
He saw Julie, but not as she was in life. He saw her playing happily in this beautiful garden full of vibrant colors. She looked completely healthy, whole, free from all her problems. He felt this immense love from her and heard her assure him she'd always be with him.
And the impact on him.
He was described as ecstatic. It transformed his grief into this feeling of reconnection and peace. A year later, he told Botkin he still felt that connection. It completely changed his view. He came to believe people just change state and inhabit a different environment, an exquisite environment.
So Botkin claims a high success rate. What are the typical experiences like?
The sources say Botkin reports about a 70% success rate over thousands of sessions. And this is apparently across all sorts of people, different faiths, even atheists and skeptics.
And what form does the communication take for the patient?
It varies. Sometimes vivid visions like Gary's, sometimes clear telepathic voices, other times distinct physical sensations. The deceased are almost always reported as loving, reassuring, saying they're okay, encouraging the living person.
Any other recurring themes?
Yes, sometimes forgiveness is involved, either offered by the deceased or sought by them for things left unresolved. And again, crucially, like with spontaneous ADCs, there's the claim that sometimes new, verifiable information comes through. Things the patient didn't know, like maybe a warning about a health issue that later proves accurate.
How does Botkin counter the hallucination argument for these induced experiences?
He directly argues against it in the sources. He says patients consistently describe IADCs as feeling fundamentally different from dreams or hallucinations. He contrasts them with typical psychological hallucinations, which are often negative, tied to disorders, and feel internal.
Whereas IADCs are.
Overwhelmingly positive in content, according to the reports. They show consistent themes across different people, and they seem to have lasting therapeutic benefits. And again, that point about verifiable new information is used to argue it's not just in the subject's head.
There's another perspective mentioned from Dr. Olivier Chambon, a French psychiatrist who uses the method.
Yes, Dr. Chambon is quoted calling it revolutionary for grief therapy, saying it can really fast-track the healing. He agrees with Botkin, these aren't just hallucinations or defense mechanisms.
Why not?
Because, he argues, the messages received can sometimes contradict what the patient consciously expects or even wants to hear. That suggests the information might be coming from an external source.
And Dr. Chambon also links this to a shift in how we think about grief therapy today.
Exactly. He points out the old advice, try to forget, cut ties, move on, is increasingly seen as unhelpful, even harmful. The newer thinking emphasizes maintaining the relationship.
Maintaining it. How?
Recognizing that the relationship hasn't ended, it's just changed. It's become more subtle, maybe internal, but the love bond can still exist and even deepen. IADC, he argues, facilitates this beautifully. It shows the bereaved person. The connection isn't severed, just different.
And helps them feel the deceased hasn't suffered. Reduces fear of death.
Precisely. Knowing their loved one is okay and feeling they can still connect, potentially even find them again someday, that's presented as hugely comforting and fear-reducing.
Okay, so we've covered spontaneous ADC and therapeutically induced IADC. The sources then pivot to another angle. The scientific study of people who claim to have the ability to communicate mediums and clairvoyance.
Right. Moving into the empirical investigation of mediumship, Can specific individuals reliably receive information supposedly from the deceased?
And this takes us back to those 19th century researchers again.
It does. William James, Myers, Gurney, Richin, Risch, they saw mediumship and clairvoyance, which were big topics then, as really important areas for psychology and science. They didn't want to just dismiss it.
What was their goal?
Their core question was, can we scientifically test if authentic messages from the deceased, containing information unknown through normal senses, can actually be delivered by a medium? They saw this as potential hard evidence for consciousness surviving death.
But mediumship lost a lot of scientific credibility for a long time, didn't it? Why was that?
Primarily because of widespread fraud, according to sources. Many mediums were exposed using tricks, deception, stage magic, basically. People like Harry Houdini were very active in exposing this.
Right.
Houdini was actually interested in survival, but hated seeing people exploited. All these exposures led most scientists to just back away from the whole field. It seemed too tainted.
So when did serious scientific studies start up again?
It took nearly a century, but eventually, a new generation of researchers decided to revisit it, this time with much stricter methods. The sources highlight people like Dr. Julie Beischel at the Winbridge Research Center and Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona.
And what was the key question Beischel and Schwartz focused on?
A simple but crucial one. When a medium gives accurate factual information about a deceased person they'd never met, where does that information actually come from? Is it guesswork, reading cues, or something else?
So they needed really tight experimental controls to rule out the normal explanations.
Exactly. They developed this rigorous protocol specifically designed to eliminate those conventional explanations.
Like fraud or the medium doing research beforehand.
To counter that, the medium was given almost no information up front. In their experiments, the only piece of information provided for the entire reading was the deceased person's first name. Nothing else.
Just the first name. Okay. And what about cold reading, picking up on clues from the client?
They eliminated that by making sure the client, the person grieving, was not physically present with the medium during the reading, and the experimenter who was on the phone with the medium was blind. They knew nothing about the deceased or the client either, so no subtle cues could be passed along.
Clever. What about mediums just making vague statements that could fit anyone?
They addressed that too. They didn't just let the medium talk freely. The experimenter asked the medium to provide specific details relating to 4 distinct categories: the deceased's physical appearance, their personality, their hobbies or main activities in life, and crucially, their cause of death. Required specifics, not generalities.
Okay, so that's the setup. How did the actual experiment run?
Each medium did readings for 2 different deceased people, remember, only knowing their first names. The readings were done over the phone with that blind experimenter. Transcripts were made, and all names were removed.
Anonymized transcripts. Then what?
These 2 anonymous transcripts were then given to the client whose relative was 1 to 2 people read for. But the client didn't know which transcript was meant for their relative. They had to read both transcripts and rate how well each one matched the person they knew.
Ah, so they had to compare and score both, removing bias.
Exactly. It forced a more objective evaluation of accuracy.
And what did these controlled experiments find?
The sources report that the results indicated the mediums were able to obtain and report accurate, specific information about deceased individuals they shouldn't have known about at levels significantly above what would be expected by chance under those stringent conditions.
So, accurate information coming through, despite the controls. How did Beischel and Schwartz explain that? What were their hypotheses?
They proposed 2 main possibilities, both involving some form of non-conventional information transfer. Hypothesis 1. The medium is actually communicating directly with the consciousness or personality of the deceased person. The survival hypothesis.
Okay. And hypothesis 2.
Hypothesis 2.
Yeah.
The medium isn't contacting the dead directly, but is instead accessing the information telepathically or clairvoyantly from the mind of the living client, even though the client isn't present. Basically mind reading the client.
Right. So either survival or telepathy with the living. Which way did they lean according to the sources?
The sources state they tend to lean towards the survival hypothesis.
Why? What was their reasoning?
Their rationale hinges on instances where the medium provided specific, accurate information that was unknown to the client at the time of the reading. Maybe something only another relative knew, which was later confirmed.
Ah, if the client didn't know it, the medium couldn't have read it from their mind.
Precisely. They argue those instances strengthen the case that the information came from an external source, possibly the surviving consciousness of the deceased, capable of interacting with the medium.
Okay, so we've gone from spontaneous ADC to induced IADC to studying mediums. The sources then shift to a fourth area, using technology itself, instrumental transcommunication.
Exactly, ITC, a term coined by German physicist Ernst Sankowski. The basic idea, as defined in the sources, is using technology radios, TVs, computers, recorders, rather than a human medium, to try and communicate with what they call the invisible world, often meaning the deceased.
So technology as the intermediary, but with similar goals to mediumship.
Pretty much. It's presented as complementary, trying to offer solace, trying to validate survival, but using machines instead of human faculties.
What are the main types of ITC discussed today?
The sources focus mainly on two kinds, audio ITC and video ITC. Audio ITC usually involves recording background noise like radiostatic white noise with the idea that entities can manipulate that sound to form voices.
Electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP, is part of that?
Yes, EVP falls under audio ITC. And then video ITC involves filming things like TV static or using camera feedback loops, and then looking very closely at the recordings for unexpected images, faces, symbols appearing in the visual noise.
You know, the idea of using technology for this isn't actually new, is it? The sources mention some surprising historical figures.
It goes way back. Thomas Edison, apparently, back in the 1870s, talked about wanting to build a necrophone, a device sensitive enough to pick up communications from the departed to prove survival scientifically.
Like Edison, wow.
And he wasn't alone. Some of the early pioneers of radio and TV, Oliver Lodge, William Crookes, John Logie Baird, Marconi, they reportedly also thought their technologies might eventually bridge that gap. They saw the potential.
Edison's necrophone didn't happen, but audio ITC did emerge later. What are some key early examples?
The sources point to the 1950s. There's that fascinating case with the two Italian priests, Father Ernetti and Father Gemelli, in 1952. They were trying to record Gregorian chant, having trouble with their tape recorder.
Right, the wire kept breaking.
Yes. And Father Gemelli, frustrated, spontaneously asks his deceased father for help. And supposedly, they later hear a voice on the tape saying, "Of course I'll help you. I'm always with you."
And then the voice used his childhood nickname.
"But Zucchini, do you not know it's me?" A nickname only his father used. That apparently convinced Gemelli. They even told Pope Pius X about it.
Amazing story. Who else was doing early work?
A few years later, 1959, Friedrich Jürgensen in Sweden. He was recording bird songs and accidentally picked up voices. He ruled out radio interference and got hooked, spending his life recording these voices, believing they were from his deceased mother and friends.
And he inspired Konstantin Radiv.
Yes, Radiv, a Latvian psychologist, was hugely influenced by Jürgensen. He made something like 70,000 recordings, mostly using radio static, trying to capture these electronic voices.
And there was that Pi Records experiment with Radiv.
Right, in 1971, controlled conditions. Soundproof room. Radiv couldn't touch the recorder. Engineers heard only him live. But playback revealed over 200 other faint, distinct voices on the 18-minute tape.
Did Radiv notice anything distinctive about these voices?
Yes, he described specific characteristics, often a different rhythm than normal speech. Very short, like single words or quick phrases, sometimes odd syntax, or even a mix of languages in one message, not like typical broadcasts or conversation.
Marcello Bacci in Italy is another name mentioned.
Yeah, Bacci apparently used an old tube radio, tuned to shortwave static, for decades. He offered free sessions, calling it direct radio voice. The sources claim really striking results, voices addressing people by name, giving relevant answers. Even journalists and scientists reportedly attended and felt they had genuine conversations without finding any obvious fraud.
And Sarah Estep in the U.S.
She founded the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomenon in 1982. A major U.S. pioneer, received thousands of messages herself using tape recorders. She also developed that classification system for clarity.
Class C, B, and A.
Right. C being faint, needing headphones, B clear, and Class A being distinct, easily understood voices.
And what kind of information did her clearest Class A messages supposedly contain about the afterlife?
According to the sources, they painted a picture where family relationships can continue, although constant calls from Earth can be tiring for the deceased. They described the dead leading active lives, continuing earthly interests like science or art, having jobs suited to them.
Interesting, like a continuation.
Yes. Visiting places, living in houses, having helpers like doctors and nurses for those in need, even continuing spiritual practices, maybe belonging to a church. A surprisingly structured, active existence.
Okay, let's switch to video ITC. When did images start appearing?
That reportedly started around the mid-1980s. Klaus Schreiber in Germany is highlighted. He used that optoelectronic feedback method camera pointed at the TV screen, feeding the signal back into itself.
Creates complex static patterns, right?
Exactly. And out of that visual noise, he claimed identifiable faces and images started emerging. Faces of his deceased wives, his daughter, even famous people like Einstein, Romy Schneider.
And the sources mention something even stranger after Schreiber died.
Yes, the claim is that after his death in 1988, Schreiber himself started sending pictures of himself, pictures of his supposed afterlife home back to his living colleagues using the same ITC methods he developed.
Wow. So this idea of deceased researchers contacting living ones seems common in these accounts.
It's a recurring theme, not just Schreiber. Jurgensen, Rawdive, reportedly contacted living colleagues after their deaths. Mark Macy claimed multiple phone calls from Rawdive, one lasting nearly 15 minutes.
Phone calls from Rawdive after he died.
That's the claim recorded in the sources. Rawdive also supposedly communicated via radio, telling Macy and others that he was continuing his ITC work from the other side.
Did he say anything about how ITC works from that perspective?
Yes, one message attributed to Rawdive emphasized that successful ITC depends on the harmony of the people involved. Their vibrations needed to be aligned, and their intentions pure. So a human element influencing the technology.
What about more recent ITC research? Trying to make it more objective. Gary Schwartz again.
Right. Dr. Schwartz, wanting to move beyond subjective interpretation of fuzzy sounds or images, explored using highly sensitive technology. He tested a silicon photomultiplier device.
That detects single photons, tiny amounts of light.
Exactly. The hypothesis was, could a subtle energy or presence associated with the deceased cause detectable changes in photon levels in a totally dark, controlled space?
And what did his initial tests show?
He ran experiments with short time blocks. Some blocks, they'd invite deceased individuals to be present. Other blocks were controls, no invitation, or the experimenters just focusing their own intention.
And the results?
The preliminary findings reportedly showed significantly more photons were detected during the blocks when the deceased were specifically invited compared to the control or intention blocks.
So potentially a physical trace?
That's the suggestion. The sources presented as proof of concept that this kind of technology might be sensitive enough to detect something subtle associated with deceased presence, possibly leading to a new, more objective form of ITC.
Okay, we've covered a huge range. Spontaneous, induced, mediums, technology. But naturally, especially with ITC, there's a lot of skepticism. How did the sources address the common explanations like hoaxes or misinterpretations?
They acknowledge them directly. These pseudo-skeptic explanations, as they frame them, outright hoaxes, mistaking natural tech glitches or radio interference for voices or psychological effects.
Like apophenia and pareidolia, seeing patterns and randomness.
Exactly. Seeing faces in clouds, hearing voices in static. Those are common explanations, especially for the less clear ITC examples.
But what's the counterargument from the sources, especially for the clearer voices or images?
They pivot back to the quality. What about communications that are clear, distinct, and seem relevant? And they bring in technical analysis. They mention experts like Dr. Jean-Jacques Charbonnier analyzing lab-recorded voices.
And what did that analysis supposedly show?
The claim reported is that electroacoustic analysis found some of these electronic voices contain frequencies well above the normal human range, over 1400 hertz sometimes, whereas human speech is typically 8400 hertz.
So potentially non-human vocal production.
That's the implication put forward, that some voices, based on this analysis, might not be explainable by conventional means, given current science.
So looking across all these different threads, ADC, IADC, mediumship studies, ITC, what's the overall perspective offered in the sources? What's the most plausible explanation according to the author, maybe using Occam's razor?
The author's perspective, synthesizing the material, leans towards the idea that the simplest explanation fitting the range of phenomena, especially those hard-to-explain cases with new info or objective measures, is that consciousness and personality do survive physical death in some form.
But not necessarily as exact copies.
Right. They clarify it doesn't mean the voices or images are literal recordings or photos.
Yeah.
They propose this idea of transduction.
Transduction, like converting energy.
Sort of. The idea is that information carried by some kind of energy linked to the deceased mental activity gets converted or transduced into a form we can perceive through a medium senses or imprinted onto recording media. The medium or device acts as the final relay. It's presented as a key concept for understanding how survival might manifest communication.
We've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from deeply personal, spontaneous moments to therapy to lab experiments to technology. It all comes back to these huge questions, doesn't it? Can we reach across that veil? And if we can, what does it mean?
Absolutely. The sources definitely compile a fascinating, challenging body of claims and research that pushes against standard materialist views and really makes you think about life, death, and consciousness itself.
So as you, the listener, reflect on all this, the stories of ADCs, the claims of IADC, the mediumship results, the strange ITC reports, what really stands out to you? Which parts resonate? Or which parts feel most challenging to your own beliefs or understanding?
And maybe take it a step further. If we entertain the possibility, as these diverse sources suggest, that consciousness does endure and communication is possible through these different channels, what are the ripple effects? What does that imply for how we understand reality, how we navigate grief, and maybe most profoundly, how we view our own mortality? What other questions does this whole exploration spark for you?